Hello everyone, my name is Nevo Schpire. We are live from Brandeis, and today we have a very special guest with us, Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus. On October 7th, a group of Hamas terrorists infiltrated the border between Gaza and Israel and conducted a massive attack on a music festival, as well as towns and neighborhoods. That night, they brutally massacred over 1,300 people. They raped and kidnapped babies, women, elderly, people with disabilities, and people with special needs. Now there is a war unfolding between Hamas and Israel, and here we have Lieutenant Colonel Conricus to tell us about what is happening now and where this war is going.
Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus is the international spokesperson of the Israel Defense Forces, responsible for the IDF's international, traditional, and social media operations, public affairs, and public diplomacy. In over 20 years of military service, Lieutenant Colonel Conricus has held a diverse array of positions in infantry, international relations, and military diplomacy. Prior to being appointed as the IDF's international spokesperson, Lieutenant Colonel Conricus was the first IDF officer to be seconded to the United Nations, serving in the UN Peacekeeping Operations Office and Military Affairs in New York. Welcome, Lieutenant Colonel Conricus.
Thank you for having me. I hope you can hear me well. Thank you for having me. I'm pleased and happy, and I think this is a good use of my time, despite the fact that we are all very busy in fighting in the IDF and me talking in the spokesperson unit. We still haven't finished burying all of our dead. There are still between 100 and 200 missing people on top of 200 Israelis that were dead and are now being held hostage by Hamas. It is a tremendous, and everybody I know is either someone who was either killed or injured or taken hostage, something that no house in Israel hasn't been touched by, including my own. I have close friends from the military, high rank, who unfortunately died, were killed in combat. People that I have known for 20 years fought alongside the moment. This is a watershed moment. Reality in Israel was one thing. It was on October 7th, that changed forever. And looking ahead, what we are now understanding and what I'm feeling is that we are going to make a historic move that will change the security situation in Israel for the better, not just for the coming few years and regional quiet. We will change the security situation for generations. There will be generations of Israeli children flourishing in the area around Gaza. We will outgrow.
This was very useful to hear. A lot of us here are constantly concerned about the state of things in Israel right now. So thank you so much for sharing this with us. Next, we will be hearing from Liam.
So one of the questions that we received on our anonymous form was, what is the logic behind Israel, quote unquote, carpet bombing Gaza, and how would this make Israel any safer?
Yeah, that still a bit like a loaded question, and I'm not criticizing me, but the person that asked that has a certain agenda. So what Israel is doing is striking military targets. We are hunting Hamas commanders, and we've already been successful in killing more than 10 senior Hamas commanders. We are striking their military infrastructure, and we're degrading their military capabilities, the rocket launchers, the places where they store the rocket launchers, the bunkers, the command and control facilities, places where they collect intelligence, where they plan operations, and also their banks, how they launder money, how they provide logistics, places where they store fuel and food for Hamas operatives, for Hamas terrorists. All of that are targets, and that is what we're striking in Gaza. We are also, what we would call in military language, we are preparing the battlefield for the next stage of operations, for maneuver, which is going to happen at the time that will be chosen by us. And it's important to know, and we have said this clearly, that the people of Gaza are not our enemies. We're not at war with the people of Gaza. We are at war with Hamas. and it was Hamas that started this war. They invaded into our communities. They butchered more than 1,000 civilians and 300 soldiers, and they took more than 200 hostages. Every time you think about what's happening in Gaza, remember 1,000 civilians, women repeatedly, bodies were mutilated, heads were chopped off, women, children, elderly, babies, and infants were taken hostage together with soldiers. And those are the atrocities that unleashed this violence, and that must be overshadowed by sad images of rubble from Gaza.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Conricus, for that. Definitely, we feel that a lot of people don't have a grasp of what the reality looks like in Gaza, so this was very insightful. Next, we're going to be with Sophia. Sophia.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I'm a big fan. I loved your response to Sky News on Twitter. And the question was that I had, how does the IDF tell the difference between civilians and Hamas on the ground?
That is very challenging. Just like it's very difficult to distinguish between ISIS terrorists and the peaceful people who lived in Mosul or Kab or Deir ez-Zor, places in Iraq and Egypt, which I'm familiar with. It is very difficult to distinguish between Hamas and the other. Why? Because Hamas blend in, it tries to blend in the civilian population and to use them as human shields. What we try to do is to apply what we call distinction, try to distinguish using intelligence and by tracking their whereabouts, and we distinguish between civilians and Hamas terrorists or combatants. It is very challenging because Hamas does everything in order to embed himself in the civilian population, and he used the civilian population as their human in order to make it more difficult for us to target them. This is not a unique phenomenon for Hamas. ISIS does and did the same. So did Al-Qaeda. All of the other terrorists, whenever the fighting gets real and they feel danger, then they try to look like civilians, put their guns down or hide, and pick up the gun when the situation is safe. We track, follow, and analyze the movement of terrorists, and we try to apply the principle of distinction whenever we target. All of our strikes are based on live updated intelligence, including visual intelligence, signal intelligence, and even human intelligence about the location of terrorists. And we try to the greatest extent possible to strike terrorists only, and to make sure that whenever we do strike a location, there's a clear military gain or a clear military mission that justifies striking whatever location Hamas fighters or operatives are hiding. But it is a challenging situation, and I think that if you'd ask American service members that have fought in Iraq or Afghanistan or other places, they'll tell you how difficult it is. We are taking significant measures to distinguish combatants from non-combatants, basically terrorists and civilians. And as I've said before, the civilians are not our enemies. Our fight is against Hamas.
Next, Leo.
My question is, what is your anticipated time window before Israel loses support from the U.S. and other countries?
And part of the considerations that we have. What we're doing now is garnering support, ratcheting up, and let's say filling our bank of legitimacy with international support, first and foremost from the most important countries in the world, the US, UK, Germany, France, and many other Western countries, Western free democracies that fight against evil and totally understand the situation that we are in. I think that this is not another round of fighting. This isn't another conflict between Israel and Hamas. This is a war between Israel, a democracy, the free world, and Western civilization against the darkest and the most evil type of organizations that the world has seen. And just as the world came together and was disgusted by the atrocities and the cruelty of ISIS, we see today that the world comes together and support Israel, despite a lot of differences and politics and other underlying topics. But we see wall-to-wall support from world leaders, of course, of free democracies. I'm not counting on China and Russia to support us, but I'm talking about freedom-loving, democratic countries that have values that cherish life and humanity. All of those countries stand firmly with Israel. President Biden has made outstanding, clear statements about what needs to be done and how solid U.S. support is for Israel. And that has been backed up by wall-to-wall support in Senate and Congress. We see polling in the U.S. that indicates very strong support for Israel, and that's very important. And we have had an almost relentless aerial train of Western leaders and foreign ministers coming to Israel, witnessing the atrocities, speaking about it, and telling Israel and the world, especially the Arabs, that Israel is the right side here. We have been attacked by a brutal, bloodthirsty group of murderers and rapists and butchers and kidnappers, and that Israel has all the right in the world to eradicate Hamas and to defend itself. And that's an important message. And I hope that continues. We will work hard in order to maintain that support. Sure, it may not be easy, and maybe in the future there will be more criticism towards Israel, but we will be steadfast in our mission and our focus on the task at hand. The task at hand, our aim is to militarily eradicate Hamas, to destroy Hamas so that such an attack will never, ever happen again from Gaza.
Thank you again for being here, Lieutenant Colonel Conricus. Question 4 is, what is the IDF's priority at the moment? To return the captives or to annihilate Hamas?
So the hostages, they're not captives, they are hostages because there are civilians who are being held. The issue is extremely complex, heart-wrenching, like no other issue the state of Israel has dealt with, I would say. And all of the collective intelligence and military capabilities of the state of Israel, not only the IDF, are focused on bringing our people home. No stone will be left unturned and no terrorist will be left alive before we get our people back. There is a tension between that issue and the campaign. And what I will say, without directly answering the question, is that we will dismantle Hamas. Hamas, at the end of this war will end with our hostages back home and with a non-existent Hamas and no other terrorist organizations either in the Gaza Strip. That's how this war is going to end. If it can be done with an unconditional Hamas surrender and an unconditional return of the hostages, fine. Many lives in Gaza will be saved and probably many of our own as well. If they don't do that, we will do it for them, and it will cost lives and it will take time, but at the end, Hamas will be dismantled and the hostages will be home.
Thank you very much. The last thing that we would like to ask, and want to remember and want everyone to remember, that there are still innocent people being held hostage in Gaza as we speak. So the last question to you is, do we know how many are currently in Gaza and how many of them are alive?
Yes, we have updated numbers. It is more than 200 Israelis that are held hostage by Hamas. Of those, we have corpses, Hamas, they abducted corpses of military and of civilians. They abducted women, children, elderly, infants, disabled people, and even a Holocaust survivor. There are at least 30 children that are being held by Hamas, people under the age of 18. some of them very, very young, and there are at least 10 elderly people above the age of 70. Those are those numbers, and of course, many women and people that are totally civilian and don't have anything to do with the fighting, with the military or anything else. So extremely brutal. Many of the people were brutalized before they were taken, and we have multiple reports of sexual violence towards women. Horrendous reports. It is infuriating, and it is something that we have never ever dealt with before. But we will overcome this challenge as well. And at the end of this war, Hamas will no longer exist, and our people will be home.
Thank you. Thank you for these words. We would like to thank you on the behalf of the Brandeis community for coming here and for sharing this very important information with us. This means a lot to us, and we appreciate the time that you took to come here. Do you have any final message you want to say to the entire community while they're listening?
I'd like to thank you for having me. A pleasure. And I would like to say that it is extremely important that Jews around the world, in America and in the rest of the diaspora, remain strong, hold their head high, are brave to fight against anti-Semitism, to stand up against bullying, to speak truth to those who try to slander Israel and the Jewish state and the activities of the IDF, and that we in Israel rely and cherish the support that we get from our brothers and sisters around the world, that we have but one homeland, our ancestral homeland, the state of Israel. We are now defending it against the most evil terrorist organizations that we have ever faced. We will overcome, we will prevail, and my wish is that Jews around the world will hold their head high, fight back against hate, fight back against anti-Semitism, be brave, stand up, even if it's difficult, but understand that this is a historic time. You will tell your grandchildren about this. You will tell your grandchildren that you were alive on October 7th when this war started, and hopefully you'll be able to tell your grandchildren about stories of how you supported Israel, how you were on the right side of history, how you supported light versus darkness, and how you stood up bravely in face of many Israel haters who masquerade as liberals and humanitarians and progressives, how you stood up for Israel, for what's right, and defended what is right against darkness.
Toda rabba. Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, for giving us these inspiring messages. We recognize that it is incredibly difficult to make time while a war is unfolding. Now, this is the end of our session. I also want to thank today's panelists, Professor Guy Antebi for supporting us today, Peyton Gillespie, Blayse Freedman, Liam Spiker, Dov Ratner, and Rahmey for presenting today's questions. And finally, thanks to all of you for listening. Nevo Schpire, signing off.